Hey everyone, my name is Brian and this is Legacy Escape Box, and today we are here with Rita Orlov. Rita, thank you so much for being here today. I appreciate you coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, so Rita has a new game coming out, Threads of Fate, and that is going to be on Kickstarter. And first of all, what a title! That is amazing.
So it's a new old game, really.
Mm-hmm.
It's a remake of my first game called The Tale of Ord,
Mm-hmm.
and I was struggling for a while to figure out if I wanted to change the name. And then I kind of thought of this at like 2 a.m. one day, and that felt like the right thing. So now it's Threads of Fate.
Epic, yeah. It reminded me of that movie Shakespeare in Love, when Shakespeare and Kit Marlowe met each other, and Marlowe said, "Hey, I'm writing a new play. It's called The Massacre of Paris," and Shakespeare was like, "Oh, what a title!" That's what I feel. I feel like Threads of Fate is such a great title. I'm blown away.
Well, thank you. Titles are hard, so I feel like when it hits you,
Oh
you
my
gotta
gosh.
you gotta take it.
100%. Well, tell me, I just want to know, first of all, how did you get started in kind of the mystery, the escape room, tabletop? How did all that start for you?
Sure. So I actually worked at the second escape room that opened in the US back in
Wow.
2013, like
Wow.
fall of 2013. So I was there for about 2 years, and then after I left, I still wanted to design games, and
Mm-hmm.
I, couldn't really open my own escape room, so I got a day job, and I was thinking like, what can I kind of do on the side on my own time? So I decided to start making tabletop games, and at the time, there wasn't really a whole lot in this genre, and I couldn't really find something that was exactly the kind of game that I wanted to play that kind of combined like challenging puzzles and narrative, and physical objects in a satisfying way. And so I was
Mm-hmm.
basically just trying to make the game that I wanted to play, and that was how the Tale of Ord ended up happening.
Yeah, awesome. Well, I looked at that game, Tale of Ward on BGG, and it has high ratings. People love it. So you got to tell me, Threads of Fate. Did you change anything around? I know probably on a remake you did some edits, but um, what did you end up changing? Of course, without giving any spoilers.
Yeah, it's I learned a lot in the last 5 years. So a lot
Hmm.
of the changes just came from kind of that knowledge that has accumulated. And when I first made it, I set out to make a challenging game, but it turned out that it was really a little bit too challenging, in in
Hmm.
the way that I didn't want it to cross over into frustrating, but I think it did for a lot of
Right.
people. And I was trying to figure out a way to kind of smooth out a lot of those rough spots where people struggled in the puzzles. So I took a lot of the feedback that I got from Tale of Ord players and tried to implement that into Threads of
Hmm.
Fate. And we also rewrote the narrative a little bit. I worked with a TV and film writer named Lauren Bello, who is also very deeply steeped in the puzzle escape room immersive genre. And so she basically did her own rewrite of the text. And the story is largely the same, but we were able to weave together the narrative and the puzzles a little bit better. So there are a few
Hmm.
changes in that sense, just in terms of making everything make more sense and not use too much escape room logic, as we like to say.
Right.
Yeah, and then there's a couple other small changes that were just, for the sake of making it feasible to actually manufacture, because the original game I put together by hand, and there were only 500
Hmm.
copies because it was kind of an insane venture, and the game culminates. This isn't too much of a spoiler because there's pictures of it
Okay.
online, but it culminates in a wooden box, which the
Hmm.
original version of was painstaking to put together, and
Oh, I bet. Yeah.
really not ideal in its engineering, but it was, kind of what I could do myself at the time.
Hmm.
So, I redesigned that a little bit to make it both more user friendly and more assembly friendly in terms of actually getting it manufactured. But it's now like a hardwood wooden box, so I think it actually looks nicer, but it is
Yeah.
definitely a noticeable prop change.
Wow, that's awesome. Yeah, I mean, 500 boxes. Wow, I can't even imagine how you could get all of that done. But wow, that's a labor of love, I'm sure.
It took, well, it was over a period of about a year and a half. So
Hmm.
I assembled, the game comes in four chapters. So I would assemble the chapters like 100 at a time. And kind of
Hmm.
just my apartment was full of boxes for months and months and months. And then the boxes, I usually did like 10 to 20 at a time. And just as I
Hmm.
got more orders, I would make more of them because, it both took a lot of time and a lot of space to have that many
Yeah.
materials sitting around.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the manufacturing process itself, and that's really interesting that you're able to do it a little bit differently this time. I did see on Instagram a wooden box that I think you mentioned, and so I was really excited about that. And then, of course, on the BGG for the Tale of Ward, I saw a box in one of the images, and so yeah, I was really interested about that because I love that. I like I have a few puzzle boxes myself, but that part really intrigued me, and so I'm looking forward to seeing how that is interwoven inside the story in the game.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I considered the possibility of making like a less, it's a premium game.
Hmm.
Uh, I considered making a sort of simplified version with less kind of, I don't know, extravagant components, so to speak. But it
Hmm.
kind of felt like it took away a lot from the realism of it, and I feel like the box is such an exciting,
Yeah.
ending to the whole saga. So it
Yeah.
didn't feel like it made sense to make
Hmm.
sort of a lesser version of that.
So you mentioned 4 chapters, I guess. So is that how the game is going to be? Is it something that you play on different nights, or would someone sit down and play it all together? Can you walk me through that a little bit, of course, with no spoilers, maybe?
Yeah, of course, of course. Definitely do not recommend doing it in one sitting. Some people like doing marathons. I think,
Mm.
you could maybe do two in one sitting, but even that's kind of a lot. Each one takes about like 2 to 3 hours,
Oh my goodness.
depending on the group, depending on, how many people, how much experience they have. But it's almost like each one is really its own game, except it's just a chapter within a larger story. So I would
Hmm.
recommend devoting one night per chapter.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. 12 hours or however long it takes someone, more or less. Oh my goodness. That's incredible, though, to
You're
be
just
able to
not
fit
going to be
that.
happy by the end, Like you're going to get to the third chapter and be like, "I'm so tired." And that's it just makes it, not as fun by
Yeah.
that point. So you want to be fresh,
Yeah.
especially when you're solving puzzles.
Absolutely. Yeah. Okay. Well, good tip. Good to know. Um, so I plan on taking a look at that. I'll definitely break it out into separate days, but tell me everything about it. I guess maybe tell me a little bit about the theme. So basically, tell me everything about the story with no spoilers. So essentially, tell me 10% of the story.
So you are contacted by the Dean of the Emrys Institute, which is a place devoted to the study of essentially sociology, archaeology, a lot of
Mm-hmm.
kind of Norse related materials, but anything from language and history. So you're on the search for two professors that have gone missing. One of them had gone missing earlier, and then her husband, who also teaches at the institute, went missing, probably went to look for her. So you're trying to figure out what happened, and without spoiling anything, she was having a lot of strange dreams that had to do with sort of the Norse mythology and kind of potentially magical
Mm-hmm.
happenings in the north, and she may have gone to seek out some answers.
Amazing. I am pumped. I am so excited. Wow. I love that. Does Threads of Fate, and you've designed several games, Adrift, The Light in the Mist, Emerald Flame, Whisper in the Woods. Are your games all standalone? And can you tell me a little bit about some of your other games? And also, are some of those other ones still in print?
Yeah, Whisper in the Woods was like a special little 40 copies Christmas
Mm-hmm.
thing, so that one is not, but the other ones are still in print. And they are all standalone games, but I kind of like to think of them happening in the same universe where,
Mm.
it's sort of our reality, but there's this like extra layer of reality that has some magic to it.
Yeah.
And there are in some places little Easter eggs that you might encounter that kind of connect the
Yeah.
worlds a little bit, and they're quite small and subtle. But it's just a little bit of a nod to like the characters
Mm.
existing in all of those places and certain magical places, perhaps being accessible in all of those stories. And Whisper in the Woods actually sort of connects the Tale of Ord and Emerald Flame
Oh,
universes.
interesting.
So it was probably, I think a lot of the people who played it had played both games. Um, but yeah,
Yeah.
I liked the idea of them all kind of happening together, and I plan to maybe continue to sprinkle some of that throughout the post
Yeah.
universe.
Okay, that's awesome. I love that. Um, so dealing with Kickstarter, I know right now it's probably the calm before the storm. It's a lot of work to get one up and running, I know. So how excited are you on a scale of 1 to 10 about getting this thing started and then getting it finished?
um, I'd say a 9, but getting it finished is always a 10. Um,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
especially if we can actually get it, get everything printed and delivered on time. That's
Hmm.
always always a 10 if we can make that
Oh, yeah.
happen.
Yeah, absolutely. So when you're designing puzzles, I would love to know, someone who's super creative like you, where do you get your ideas for your designs and from your stories and your games?
Hmm. So I kind of get a lot of puzzle ideas from really just observing random things in the world, and I think those are the most fun things to make puzzles out of. But a lot of times, like I guess from research and source material. So when I was working on Tale of Ord, I did a lot of reading about Norse mythology and looking at a lot of imagery. And as I was looking through these images and reading about the history of the area, I started to kind of get some ideas of like how I can tie these things into puzzles. The Emerald Flame happens in Prague, which has a history of alchemy, and that's what the story in the game is
Yeah,
about.
yeah.
But um, it all actually started because I found the Prague astronomical clock, which didn't even end up being in the game, but I saw it and I was like, this needs to be a puzzle somehow.
This is
And
epic.
that
Yeah,
kind
yeah.
of started the whole tangent of like, just researching into Prague. But I went there and I took all these reference photos and kind of found elements in the world that could kind of lend themselves to become a puzzle. So when I was walking around there, I saw like buildings that had these plaques that had animals on them. And I was like, this could be interesting to use, like,
Yeah.
create a map and then like different buildings have, you can make connections between them. So yeah, and I also looked at a lot of like alchemical manuscripts, which are, all unintelligible to me, but that was kind of good because I just would look at the weird diagrams and the pictures and be like, well, how could
Mm-hmm.
this be a puzzle? So I
Yeah.
kind of take a lot of sort of abstract things that are not meant to be puzzles and try to make them into puzzles.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's super interesting. I love the chemical table and all those things that you mentioned. And I can see that a lot too, as a designer, where you can look at something and try to make it into something else. So that's super cool. And even your trip to Prague, wow, talk about going to the source material, right? I'm
I mean, I
sure.
didn't go there just for that, to be fair,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
I
yeah.
I definitely had it in mind when I was going. And I mean, it also varies depending on the game because for Light in the Mist, the inspiration for the puzzles was really trying to link the meanings of the tarot cards into it.
Mm-hmm.
So, like reading of what each of the cards meant and thinking about how I can kind of tie that action or that sentiment into what the person is doing when they're solving it.
Mm-hmm. So, other tabletop puzzle adventures, have you gotten to play a lot of these? Were there any that you just loved or took inspiration from? Do you have any favorites?
Absolutely. I have my little favorite list that I always like to recommend to people.
Mm.
Um, the Vandermeer dossier by Diorama. They're actually, it's the first part of a trilogy that was originally in
Ah,
Dutch, and they recently started translating it to English. And the
sweet.
second installation in the trilogy is going to be on Kickstarter, I think, in May.
Ah.
So that's going to be one that I'm going to be backing for sure. Society of Curiosities, their whole like quarterly subscription series is great.
Mm-hmm.
Um, on Circus Grounds is a recent one that came out by Studio Stamp, and that one is more of a mystery than like puzzly per se, but it's
Hmm.
got a really nice narrative, and all the components are really pretty. And then Dark Parks, Witchery Spell, and what's the new one called? whatever
I don't
is
know that one. Yeah.
whatever is the more recent one that they made.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm blanking on the name right now, but those
Mm-hmm.
are probably up there with my favorites. And Hink's Elevator is also quite a lot of fun. It's less
Ah.
narrative driven, but it's got really cute puzzles. And Bluefish
Yeah.
Games makes really nice, like humorous, whimsical uh,
Mm-hmm.
puzzles, which is just kind of like refreshing among so many kind of more serious ones in the field.
Sure. Yeah. That's awesome. So, as far as escape rooms, you mentioned, I'm going to go back to that when you mentioned earlier that you were at the second escape room that opened in the US. So, I would love to know more about that because that was so early on in the escape room industry. Yeah, I would love to hear more about your experiences there.
Yeah, it was a very interesting learning experience. A lot of a lot of things happened in those 2 years, especially in
Uh,
the industry, because when I started out there, it was just in a temporary space, so it was really
hmm.
kind of like an experiment of like if people are even gonna come pay to be locked in a room to solve puzzles. And shortly after, got moved to a permanent space, and two more rooms were opened, and then they expanded into other cities. So I was kind of game mastering, but also like doing some of the prop and set design and assisted
Yeah.
managing. And it was like, startup kind of feeling where you wear a lot of hats.
Hmm.
And I helped set up a bunch of the locations in other cities. But, at the time also there were like slowly other escape rooms popping up. So, my friends and I would try to like play any of the new ones that opened because there were still so few of them at the time.
Hmm.
But once we started working on new rooms, I got the opportunity to do some game design for those, and that was, kind of how I got started doing it because I was always into puzzles and games, but I never really considered the possibility that this could like be a career.
Yeah.
Um, but also just, learning, watching people play so many games, figuring out like how people think and how people approach problems was a really valuable experience, which is also why I really like to watch people playtest when
Yeah.
they're playing my games right now because I realize that if I'm not watching them, there's so many things that I'm missing. Whereas if you can really like hear and witness people's thought processes, it gives you so much more insight into like the little details because they might tell you about the bigger problems, but they might forget by the end, like the small stuff that didn't
Yeah.
quite hit. And, I think that stuff is also equally important.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, I mean that's a fantastic process. Of course you have to design everything and then play test it, and then based on feedback you can, I guess, if you want to, redo some of it. But as far as your process goes, how do you get started on it? Are you focused more on story or simply a puzzle that you want to push into a different kind of story, or are they both kind of a simultaneous during that process?
There's kind of a lot of back and forth. I think I used to start more puzzle focused, and I've tried to integrate the story earlier on at this point because I think um,
Mm-hmm.
designing it holistically, it ends up feeling better in the end because it doesn't feel like you're trying to create a story to wrap around a puzzle or create a puzzle to like shoehorn it into a story.
Right.
And I think when those two things bounce off of each other, it creates
Mm-hmm.
a better experience for the player ultimately. And if you're, going through an experience and like the things that you're doing are kind of mirroring what's happening with the characters in the game,
Mm-hmm.
that also create like allows you to kind of relate to those characters and sort of put yourself in the story more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I suppose it's a little bit like songwriting in a way. If an artist is writing the music and has the lyric at the same time and wants to convey a certain feeling, a little bit more holistic. I'm guessing I'm not a singer songwriter, thank goodness. But yeah, I suppose that creative process, everything kind of works together in the same way. Um, Going back to that escape room. So at this point, how many escape rooms do you think you've played? Have you kept track? Is it a ton? Is it just a handful? Tell me about that.
Um, I did start keeping a spreadsheet at some point, so
Yeah.
I know fairly accurately. I haven't checked it recently, but I think I'm somewhere around 330.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. Yeah, that's amazing. Wow, that is a lot of escape rooms. Have you done those primarily where you are? Have you traveled around and done those all across the country, internationally?
Internationally too, yeah. I've done a good handful of cities in the US. I've played a couple cities in Canada and then in a bunch of different countries in Europe.
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. And then online, I guess, during lockdown, I know a lot of people tried to play some online as well, which I got to do with some teammates, which was a ton of fun. And it's some escape room friends that I haven't met in real life.
Hmm.
I met them in life because I can see you, but
Yeah.
no, we haven't met in person yet. But we got to do some online, which was super fun. Have you had any good experiences doing that?
I've done a few online, probably like not as many as I would have expected to do, I think,
Mm-hmm.
during lockdown. But I guess, I don't know, maybe I was busy. Like, I was doing the Emerald Flame Kickstarter at the time and also like starting to work on Light in the Mist, so that probably
Mm-hmm.
preoccupied a lot of my time. Um, I did, what was it? The Assassin Artist, or it's called something like that. I'm forgetting the exact name now, but
Okay.
it was like this company in California, and they did something really interesting, where you were directing an actor in the room, and they implemented this mechanic where you can kind of die and then you start at a point in the game and you can like make different
Uh,
choices based on the
mm,
information that you uncovered in the earlier section of the game. And that
mm-hmm.
was something that I hadn't seen done before, so that was really cool, and something that would be really hard to do with an in-person room.
Yeah.
And Trapped also did these just audio based rooms. And one of my favorites was their superhero themed one where we each player got to have different superpowers, and so you could use those when you're
Oh,
solving
fun.
the puzzles in the game. And I thought that was really smart because I think the best games online were ones that were really taking advantage of the medium and allowing you to do things that you wouldn't be able to do in real life rather than just trying to kind of emulate the escape room experience in real life because it's not going to be the same. You can't touch objects, but in real life, you can't turn back time. But maybe you can if you're playing an
Right.
audio based escape room.
Right. And speaking of, online and then physical, Do any of your games have components of both that you can talk about?
Yeah, so Emerald Flame has a little bit of online elements, and it's really just the person that you're communicating with is like through a
Hmm.
chat, so you're basically submitting your answers to them. So it's pretty minimal. Um, Threads of Fate, though, has actually quite a bit of online content. You have to go find a website, and you have to also go on the Emran's website to find some information. There's a bunch of online aspects to the game, so that one is the most sort of digital and physical hybrid. Since
Mm-hmm.
then, I've kind of started inching away from using online elements. So Adrift and Light in the Mist are completely
Mm-hmm.
analog. And I think the next game I'm
Gotcha.
designing will also probably be totally analog. And that was just because I realized that, I try to play a lot of tabletop games myself, and I realized that sometimes I really don't feel like going on my computer when I'm playing this game. Like, I just want it to be on the
Mm-hmm.
table, and I want all the information to be there in these elements. So I'm trying to kind
Yeah.
of, lean more in that direction. And people have also asked me, like, oh, can I take the Light in the Mist and play it in a cabin in the woods? And I'm like, yes, you can, and you should, because that's
And
actually
you
the
should.
perfect atmosphere. Well, a
Yeah.
cabin in the woods is really it's on the cover of the game. There's a cabin. So
Yeah.
that's exactly what
Yeah.
you should do.
Perfect. Well, what are the plans for Post Curious, your company? Any plans going forward? I mean, you're living the dream right now, right? This is what you want to be doing?
Yeah, absolutely. I cannot announce the next thing quite yet, but we
Mm-hmm.
will be uh, working on publishing a game that I didn't design soon. So
Ah,
that's that'll be my first time doing that. And but I'll probably be making that announcement around June, so people can keep an ear out for it.
sweet.
But in the meantime, I'm also working on designing another game, which will probably be on Kickstarter next year, depending on how long it
Mm-hmm.
takes me to do it. And I'm really excited for that one because it has been kind of percolating in my mind for basically like 3 years now. It's
Yeah.
just
Wow.
been a very, very slow drip, and
Yeah.
hopefully soon I'll actually have like more time to really devote
Mm-hmm.
to developing it. But yeah, I mean, pretty much kind of staying along the same lines, though. I'm not really looking to expand or sort of, you know, go into other realms, so to
Yeah.
speak, because
Yeah.
I think there's still a lot of fun things to explore in the tabletop puzzle genre.
Yeah. Incredible. Well, before we get out of here, I always like to ask, someone like you who's done hundreds of escape rooms. So, to a more casual escape room player, what advice would you give them on how do they beat an escape room? How do they win?
That's such a funny question. Um, hmm. I mean, observation skills are definitely a must, right? Communication
Mm-hmm.
with your teammates. If you find something, you gotta tell everyone else about it. Also, some rooms don't require this, but sometimes you feel like you're missing something. Just do a really thorough search around,
Yeah.
because a lot of times when my team ends up asking for a hint, it's because we just missed something that was hidden really well.
Mm.
And the other thing is, like, if you think you have the right combination, but a lock's not opening, let someone else try. Because
Yeah.
that also happens a lot. And it's not necessarily that person's fault. It's just like sometimes the lock doesn't open for you, but it opens for someone else, even though you're trying the same thing. I don't know. I don't understand it, but like, that's, don't be ashamed to ask somebody else to try and open
That's
something
right.
that's not working for you.
That is so true. That has happened
Don't
to
have too
me.
much pride either about taking
Yeah.
hints. Like, if you haven't made any progress in 10 minutes, just it's okay to ask for a hint.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. I've been there. Um, well, best of luck on Threads of Fate. It's hitting Kickstarter and tell us the date.
Tuesday the 18th, April 18th.
All
9
right.
a.m. Eastern.
Sweet. That's exciting. It's going to be great. I know it is. Your games have such great ratings, and I'm really looking forward to it also. So, thank you so much for being here today. Appreciate it so much.
Thanks so much for having me. It's great talking to
All
you.
right. You too. Talk to you soon.